What's up, Marvel fans? In this video, I'm doing kind of a creative exercise on if I was Kevin Feige or if I was running the MCU, what I would do, right? How would I run my thing? Um, and especially post Secret Wars, how would I kind of run the MCU? Um, if you don't know, Secret Wars is right now the last announced Marvel movie, like on the docket, I suppose. It has the Russo brothers directing it, and so they just recently announced that. Um, and lots of people are speculating that Avengers: Secret Wars might reboot the MCU, right? Kind of start fresh. Some people are saying it might be a soft reboot. Some people are saying it might be a hard reboot. That like a soft reboot being the stuff that came before is kind of important, but not super important. A hard reboot is kind of saying the stuff that came before really does not matter at all. Right? And the comic Secret Wars kind of serve this purpose where the comics were really convoluted and they kind of wanted a reboot, right? To let people back on the train, right? People who've fallen off the MCU or people who fell off the Marvel comics. You can start reading post Secret Wars, and basically any of the stuff that happened in the past really doesn't matter, right? It's no secret that the MCU Phase 4 movies have been flops or maybe not making as much money as the MCU is used to, right? It used to be this blockbuster making machine. Every movie was successful. And especially after Endgame, there have been, I don't know about a dip in quality. I would say probably a dip in quality, but also definitely a dip in how much money they're making, right? Um, so no one, and like I think there's a lot of reasons for this, and some of it is just it's become too convoluted. No one's keeping up with the Disney Plus shows, um, and people have stopped watching the new movies. And every time they stop watching a new movie, it makes it that much easier for them to stop watching a new like another movie, right? You stop watching one, and you're like, well, I'll have to catch back up. I can't watch the new ones out because I haven't seen the ones old yet, right? And so that's why I'm saying in this video, anyways, I'm going to pretend Secret Wars creates a hard reboot where basically everything that's happened since in the MCU can be forgotten. Right? I love the MCU. I'm not hating on the MCU at all. I'm a big fan of the MCU. Right, it gives me a little bit more creative freedom if I'm pretending that the stuff that came before doesn't matter, but we're living in a world where the audience has seen the MCU and now it's kind of being rebooted, right? And so I have a few ideas, and I just think I'm going to take you through my first wave, is what I'm going to call it, instead of phases. I'm being a little cheeky here. I'm calling it wave one instead of phase one. And right, how am I going to set up my universe? Well, so first things first, we're going to start off with an X-Men movie, a movie that I'm calling X-Men Sinister. Um, you basically the first class of X-Men. These are going to be like teenage X-Men, attempt to become heroes, to prove that mutants are not evil. And the villain they're going to take on is Mr. Sinister. And this movie takes place in the 90s, right? That's a big difference. The old Marvel movies used to always take place in the modern time, except for a few. But I'm gonna make my movies kind of like, I don't know, period pieces is the right term, but like they're definitely gonna have a setting that isn't like 20. I mean, at the time that these movies would be coming out, 2030s. Right. This one's gonna be taking place in the late 90s, and my first class X-Men team is going to be Cyclops, Jean Grey, Angel, Jubilee, and Colossus, and then of course Professor X. Um, right, I've picked some of them because you kind of need them. You need Cyclops, you need Jean Grey, and then I picked some of them because they're like fan favorites, but kind of forgotten in the comics. Where Jubilee, she's kind of like everyone's non-normie pick to be their favorite X-Men. Angel, he was actually the one of the original X-Men, but has kind of been forgotten and misused in the old movies. And then Colossus, he's also been forgotten in the X-Men movies. He was in Deadpool, but he really couldn't be a team member as Deadpool didn't have that many X-Men. Um, so I picked these five people to be my X-Men, and um, So basically, they're going to take on Mr. Sinister. I'm not super familiar with Mr. Sinister. I know he's one of the big X-Men villains. Um, and he has not been used in the movies yet, which is a big a big reason why I'm picking him. Right, I want to kind of start fresh. Everyone knows Cyclops, everyone knows Jean Grey. I don't think everyone knows Jubilee or Angel, and maybe Colossus, but I want a new version of Colossus where he can actually be part of the team. Um, and so basically, this is how I break down all my movies: 5-second movies, the characters in them, and then the consequences for the MCU, right? And the reason I do this, I don't go too deep into the story of each specific movie because I don't think we should be doing that. If I'm Kevin Feige, right, I want to let the directors make their own movie, but also have some stuff to make sure that they're all connected and what I want to see the outcome, right? The stuff that happens in the movie doesn't really matter if I'm like Kevin Feige. It's the stuff that happens after the movie that I care about, right? Because I'm trying to create a bunch of connected stories. So that's kind of why I have these set up like this. And so the consequences in the MCU, the stuff I need to see that happens in the movie to set up future stuff is Captain America. He's mentioned in passing. He's alive and like, I don't know how you would write this, but he's mentioned to be, not like the Boy Scout we all know. He's a little bit jaded. Um, X-Men and mutants are now publicly known, where right, this is the stepping off point into the MCU. Superheroes, except for Captain America, really don't exist, and now these mutants exist, and they're not really like that's a big part of the comics. The mutants are not not liked by the general public. And then also to set up future stuff, Magneto and the Brotherhood of Mutants are also mentioned. But once again, I want to do a brand new villain. So Magneto's not the villain in this one. It's Mr. Sinister. I also think Mr. Sinister has a lot of aesthetic, right, to play with. He's kind of like this vampire guy. And then also setting the movie in the 90s has a lot of aesthetic to play with, right? And these five people, I think, have a lot to do. They're like, it's a coming of age story set in the 90s, right? I think we can all imagine what I'm thinking of. And yeah, so this is the first movie that I would have, right? You want to start out with the X Men, as unfortunately the MCU could not do that. The next movie I want to do is what I'm calling Iron Man Hulkbuster. Um, so basically, the super quick breakdown is Tony Stark is tasked by General Ross to take down the Hulk, that hence Hulkbuster. But eventually, once again, being brief because I want the people actually making the movies and the creatives behind the movie to be able to make decisions. However, right, they fight a few times, but they eventually realize that they're not the true villains. Like they shouldn't be fighting each other, and they were kind of manipulated by General Ross, who is Red Hulk. And I also threw in Abomination in there because, two villains, two heroes. This movie advances the timeline. It's set in the early 2000s. Um, and I think I have Iron Man as being part of the military industrial complex, right? Kind of what he was in the original Iron Man movie from 2008. This movie takes place a little bit before that time, but Tony Stark, his dad was worked with the government and was a big seller of weapons, and they kind of deal with that in the original Iron Man. I want that to be part of this Iron Man as well. Hence why I said it in the early 2000s. Right, Iron Man and Hulk. Hulk is I'm gonna have him be a failed super soldier experiment, right? Kind of that's one of the things that is going to be a through line in lots of these movies, as you'll see. But the Hulk's a failed super soldier. Iron Man has to take him out, and then they realize that they're not actually the villains, and the real villains is Red Hulk and Abomination. Right. So once again, whoever is making this movie can do what they will with that. The big things that I need to see are Iron Man and Hulk are uneasy allies, right? And I think a big part of the Avengers that the movies missed is lots of these guys are like kind of slimy, right? Tony Stark, he was super quippy. Robert Downey Jr. was so likable in the movies. In the comics, he's kind of slimy. He's not really the most likable person, at least to start out with. And I want to see more of that. He's a good guy, definitely, but he's not the greatest. And then obviously, Bruce Banner. I want him to not just be able to control Hulk right after the first movie. I think that that was a missed opportunity where basically the Hulk movie happens, and then in Avengers he can control himself for the most part. I'd like to see it a bit more loose, and Hulk be a bit more of a wild beast. Right? So Tony Stark and Bruce Banner, they're not like the best of dudes, as you know. Tony Stark's a slimy playboy, and Bruce Banner can become Hulk if you make him mad. And then also, I want to have like an Easter egg. Wolverine is mentioned in passing, but he's beaten by Captain America in the past. That's kind of taking Wolverine out of the picture. Hugh Jackman did such an iconic job with him that I'm not even going to have him be part of this, at least to start. Like no one can replace Hugh Jackman, so I'm just not going to have Wolverine. And Wolverine is not really a crucial character in the X-Men, but I'm just going to say, there's comics where Captain America and Wolverine fight. I'm just going to say happened off screen, Captain America beat and got rid of Wolverine. And then also, once again, I think a cool post-credit scene would be Shield is mentioned. And so yeah, it introduces Shield into the universe, as that is going to be a thing. In the next movie, this is where I kind of definitely step away from anything that's happened in the past. A movie which I'm calling The Ballad of Beta Ray Bill. I don't know why I called it that, but I think it sounds fun, and that's kind of the whole part. The whole point of this movie is just fun, right? Beta Ray Bill, I'm gonna have to explain him, I guess, because people might not be as familiar with him as the other characters. But basically, what the way I'm familiar with him, he's like a normal space janitor, right? That sounds funny on purpose. Who finds out he's worthy of Mjolnir, um, which is Thor's hammer, and like he goes on adventures. And in this movie, he's gonna go on adventures throughout space, um, and I think kind of doing like a pulpy Flash Gordon type aesthetic, similar to Thor Ragnarok, where like a few short stories in one movie that I guess you could connect once again. The creators behind this movie could connect. I think would be really cool and completely different than whatever we've seen before. And the villain I'm pairing him up with is Sentry, who is like an anti-hero slash villain that I'm sort of familiar with in the comics. But I'm not really using his comic book part. I'm using more what he symbolizes. He's supposed to be like a bad Superman, which is similar to Homelander if you guys have seen The Boys. Um, and that's kind of what I'm using, right? You have this character who's really not that powerful, Beta Ray Bill, but he has a heart of gold. That's why he's worthy of Mjolnir. And then he's going to take on Sentry, who is a super powerful person with pretty corrupt morals. Right, that's what I'm going to use him as. Just like the MCU sometimes has villains from comics that are not entirely comic book accurate. Sentry's not going to be entirely comic book accurate, but I'm definitely going to use some stuff from the comics. And one big thing, once again, drawing this through line, Sentry's going to be a failed super soldier. So he is from Earth, but he is a failed super soldier, and I'm thinking of him as a mix of Sentry from the comics, Adam Warlock from the comics, and then Homelander from the boys. Right, so this like Superman type character who's not so good, doesn't really care about innocent civilians, and then he's taking on Beta Ray Bill, this not so powerful character who has a heart of gold. I think that's a easy pairing. And so I want to reference a bunch of stuff from the cosmic part of the Marvel comics, right? Whether that be, whether that be the Nova Corps. I want to like just show Nova. I think it'd be funny to pair Beta Ray Bill with Howard the Duck, um, and I think Korg from Thor Ragnarok. I think is pretty funny, and I think it'd be fine to bring back the actor, the director. I'm blanking on his name, to who played him originally, right? Because once again, I do want to sprinkle some of the old MCU into this, but not important parts. So I do think that would be kind of funny. Right, Beta Ray Bill, this weird character going on adventures with these other weird characters. Obviously, Thor is there because Beta Ray Bill has to get Mjolnir, and I think this like speeds up the introduction of Asgard, right? Because we've already seen that in Thor, and it also sidelines Thor for a new character who's similar enough, but is a new character. And I do want to introduce Nova Corps and the superhero Nova. But anyways, the important part is Beta Ray Bill comes to Earth to seek out whoever created Sentry, right? He is from Earth. He is a failed super soldier. That can be part of the end credits, tying Beta Ray Bill into the other heroes. The next movie I titled The Wasp and Giant Man. This movie is definitely the one I'm not happiest with out of all the movies I've made. Um, but basically, the 5 second plot would be two American scientists, Janet Van Dyne and Hank Pym, are tasked to make the super soldier serum, but abandon doing that, and they create like Pym particles to become new heroes. Um, this angers the parts of the U.S. government. This can be young Ross, uh, and they have to survive like assassination attempts. This one takes place in the late 80s, so this is actually the earliest movie in my timeline. And like it can have like an 80s Cold War aesthetic with like spies and uncertainty. Um, I'm not very familiar with Ant Man, which I'm calling Giant Man just to be different, in the Wasp as I am with the other characters. But that's kind of like the quick plot, and young Ross being eventually who becomes General Ross. But once again, if you see the through line that's connecting all these movies, it's the super soldier serum. These two are supposed to be making it, and they stop making it. Uh, and it kind of just shows that the consequences for the MCU. It shows that General Ross has been thinking about the super soldier serum for a while. He's obsessive, and also I want them to hint that Shield does not like the super soldier serum or General Ross, right? Even though they're both part of the American government, right? You can have factions in the government, which is I'm trying to hint at with this. Shield and General Ross are not on the same page. They don't like each other. But once again, that's more grandiose stuff. Where just in this movie, it's really focusing on the two characters. Right. The next movie I have that I came up with that I think is pretty fun is Spider-Man and Deadpool. This is where I do kind of hint back at the old MCU. Just for this movie, it's my one exception because let's be honest, the Spider-Man movies and the Deadpool movies do really well. Deadpool and Wolverine did really well. Um, and so I think you can assume that most of the audience has seen these characters and are familiar with these characters. And I'm kind of playing with this meta stuff. So Deadpool, who I would still like to be acted by Ryan Reynolds, he he basically owns the character. He is Deadpool. Ryan Reynolds is Deadpool. And he can break the fourth wall. So with that, he kind of realizes that Secret Wars was a um was a reboot. Like he understands that, he realizes that, and he's kind of confused. He's like, what's going on? Where am I? And he recognizes Spider-Man, who I'd like to still be played by Tom Holland. He's young enough. He's kind of aging with the character. I want to see an older Spider-Man. Well, Tom Holland still fits the age as he's aging with the character. I think he plays Spider-Man really well. And if he would come back, I'd love him to come back. Um, so he recognizes Tom Holland, Spider Man, and he tries to like connect with him, and he doesn't recognize anyone else. So he tries to connect with him, but Spider Man does not have fourth wall breaking powers, so he doesn't really remember the stuff before Secret Wars, and that's kind of like hinting to the audience that we can drop the stuff that happened in the past. Um, but I do think a fun villain with this movie would be Chameleon, who, if you're unfamiliar with him, he can kind of become like anyone, like he's a master of disguise. And I think it would be really fun if Spider-Man and Deadpool, who are friends in the comics, they have to team up to take out Chameleon, who uses disguises that we're familiar with, right? So he puts on like Robert Downey Jr.'s face or Chris Hemsworth or Chris Evans' face, and like kind of becomes them, like in the really meta way. I think it would be kind of fun. Um, in a funny movie, obviously, you have Ryan Reynolds, and I think the Spider-Man and Deadpool teaming up in the movies, right? We're gonna, if the Secret Wars is a reboot, it would be a shame to miss this team up, right? We couldn't have had this team up until Disney bought Fox, so it'd be a real shame to miss this team up. So I think it'd be kind of fun. It brings back some of the people from the old MCU into my MCU, and the larger consequences of this movie. It explains the universe is rebooted in movies, right? I'm talking to you as an audience, so I'm telling you that I'm rebooting the movies, but maybe not everyone's going to pick up on that. So this kind of like solidifies in the movies that the MCU has been rebooted. And also a big thing, I want to show Captain America as Chris Evans. He's going to be the actor of Chris Evans, which confuses Deadpool a little bit. I'm gonna drop that. I'll explain it eventually. And also, I think just larger Spider-Man stuff. It hints at Oscorp, and we can say Oscorp created the spiders that bit Spider-Man as like failed super soldier stuff. Once again, the through line being the failed super soldier stuff. Another X-Men movie. Um, I would call X-Men Brotherhood as the Brotherhood of the villains in this one, and the other one's Mr. Sinister was the villain. So that's kind of the through line for that. And I think a brand new class of X-Men. Um, and the X-Men I chose are Storm, Nightcrawler, Iceman, Gambit, and Rogue, as well as Cyclops and Jean coming back, right, as like older leaders of the team. Storm's the leader of this like class, but Cyclops and Jean can be in the background and help out these new X-Men. Um, I do want them to be similar ages of the old X-Men, right? So in the old one in the 90s, they were teenagers. In this one, which takes place in the early 2000s, once again advancing the timeline, um, they're like young adults. So everyone ends up being basically the same age. But I picked these X-Men. These are some of the fan favorites. Storm, everyone loves. Nightcrawler, everyone loves. Iceman, who was an original X-Men. He's kind of been forgotten in the movies, but he was also in the original movies. And then obviously Gambit, everyone loves, and then Rogue is a big fan favorite as well. Um, and this one is where I bring back some of the old villains that maybe were misused or forgotten about since the movies are kind of old, where I bring the Brotherhood of the Mutants, Magneto, Quicksilver, Scarlet Witch, Pyro, Mystique, Blob, and Toad, right? They don't all have to be crucial characters. Basically, they're all one team versus X-Men, which is another team, and they basically fight. The larger consequences of this movie are there are more mutants and the public perception of the mutants is changing, right? That's an aspect that kind of was touched in the Fox X-Men and is part of the comics, where when they're first introduced, they're not liked by the public, but then they become more and more liked as they do good deeds, and it kind of are like kind of become celebrities. So right, the other one, the first one takes place in the 90s. They're not liked at all. This one takes place in the 2000s. Time has moved on. A brand new class of X-Men are there, and they're liked a little bit more. They're not like liked by everyone, but there are some X-Men supporters in the in-universe audience. And then right, basically it's just important to make sure the X-Men are connected with the other heroes so we can reference other Marvel heroes that I've introduced. And then I think it would just be funny to have Deadpool in the end credit scene. He kind of had a few scenes with the Fox X-Men, but nothing, they were kind of just in the background, filmed on a completely different day. I think it would be funny to introduce Deadpool to the actual X-Men. But yeah, so that's this movie. And then the final movie, kind of how every phase ended with an Avengers movie for a while. My wave is going to end with an Avengers movie, a movie I'm calling Avengers Ultimate. It's called Ultimate as a reference to the Ultimates in the comic, which is like another name for the Avengers. It's really complicated, but basically, anyways, Shield gathers a bunch of heroes to create the Ultimates. That's the team name of an Avengers in the comics. It's weird, whatever. And the Ultimate's task is to take down Captain America, who's been in the background in a lot of these movies, and he's kind of like the first wave's big bad, if you will. Um, yeah, like Captain America has been like jaded. He's gotten more harsh, and he's gone rogue a lot more. Um, and I want the right. So the heroes they get together are Iron Man, Hulk, Giant Man, and the Wasp, and they run into Beta Ray Bill, who, if you remember how that movie ended, he was trying to hunt down the source of the super soldier serum. And then also Black Panther, but not the Black Panther that we know. It's, if you watch the movies, it's Black Panther's dad, T'Chaka, who I would have as the original Black Panther in this movie. They join forces to take down Captain America, which they do, but before they do, Black Panther dies, making their team the Avengers as they avenge Black Panther. And then also I have Nick Fury as comic book Nick Fury White, and I'll explain why I do that later. And then right, the villains in this movie are Captain America, who's once again played by Chris Evans, and Red Hulk. Um, and some of the larger MCU consequences, I think it'd be this is where you could kind of introduce Black Widow and Hawkeye. They don't need their own movie. They can kind of join the Avengers in the end credits or whatever. Obviously, T'Chaka has a adult son, being T'Challa, the Black Panther we all know, and he'll be the Black Panther moving forward in this universe. And then also, what am I doing with like the Captain America thing? What I'm doing is what in the comics, basically, right? The story we know of Captain America from the movies and from some of the newer comics is that Captain America was a hero in World War II. He got lost, and they found him in modern times. But that's not what he was originally, right? Because Captain America, remember it, in real life, Captain America was a superhero they created in World War II and then just kind of kept on doing stuff. He didn't go disappearing because the modern times when they made him was the 50s or the 60s. Uh, but eventually it's like retconned, and Captain America does fall into ice and become and like disappears. But the Captain America that was in the comics in the 50s and the 60s, he is like a completely different guy and kind of a villain, honestly. Like he's not a good guy. And that's kind of what I was doing with this. And I made him Chris Evans just to give the audience a reaction and a connection with him. That this Captain America that's been in the background of all these movies, played by Chris Evans, is not the real Captain America. That's why he's kind of a villain and does like bad stuff, works with General Ross. And I want to keep it obscure, but is the original Captain America alive or not? I don't know. Like that can be teased but not necessarily shown. But basically, this Captain America that's been in the background of all these movies, that's been the through line, because lots of these characters were created because they're trying to recreate the super soldier serum, is actually a villain and they beat him. Um, and then also hinting towards what I want to do next, Ultron is teased as once again you have Tony Stark, Bruce Banner, and Hank Pym, who are the creators of Ultron in the comics. They're all here, and right, maybe they were like trying to create super soldiers and they realized that super soldiers are not the answer. Well, hinting to the audience, what's the answer that they come up with to keep people safe? It's what eventually becomes Ultron. All right, conclusion. Excuse me for my rambling, but basically these are like the key takeaways. Um, so based off nostalgia and references, I want to basically forget the old universe, the stuff that happens before Secret Wars. There can obviously be Easter eggs, but anything important should be brand new and introduced because I want this to be welcoming to a new audience or an audience that fell off. And I only bring back a few actors, that being Ryan Reynolds, who owns Deadpool basically, Tom Holland, who's young enough to keep on doing this, and then Chris Evans, who ends up not being the real Captain America, even though we think he is. Um, right? And there's parts of the old that you can't beat. Wolverine, I killed him off because you cannot beat Hugh Jackman. You need to wait like a few decades, honestly, before you can even try to replace him and the audience be okay with it, right? That's why this is also why I introduced Beta Ray Bill, right? They're basically him and Thor are basically the same character, power wise, anyways. But I want to replace Thor just to have someone new, and right, people can realize that this is a new team, right? Why do I make Nick Fury white? Samuel L. Jackson did the best job playing him. You can't beat him. The comics wrote new Nick Fury to be Samuel Jackson, so I can't. Right, I wanted to make sure that no one can even compare the two Nick Furies, so I'm making him white to make sure that he's not compared to Samuel Jackson because Samuel Jackson did such an amazing job. Why am I saying Giant Man instead of Ant Man? Because once again, just these changes that make that allow the audience to kind of realize this is a new thing. Um, I want to use forgotten but fan favorite X Men once again. Um, Gambit. Everyone loves Gambit. Not really used in the new movies except for spoiler alert and Deadpool and the Wolverine. Um, Rogue, Iceman. I use all these X Men. Basically, you got to have Cyclops and Jean Grey, but everyone else, there's a lot of X Men, and a lot of them are liked by someone, and I want to use these new characters. And also, I try to use new villains that we have not seen, right? Mr. Sinister, Sentry, these new villains that we haven't seen yet that haven't been in movies. I want to give them some time to shine. Um, And right, I'm also not setting the movies in modern times. It gives this universe a distinct feel. We'll move through time, but like right, starts in the 90s, goes to the early 2000s. I think that can be fun. Give something the directors to play with, right? Just instead of just boring modern times. And then also I'm trying to do retool the stuff that what the old did bad. I think it's super important to integrate the Fox stuff right away, right? That's I think the Marvel is struggling right now because how do we introduce the X-Men, which are such crucial characters, into like a 20-year long universe that they couldn't because they didn't own the Fox stuff. And I'm gonna introduce the Fantastic Four soon. Don't worry. Um, I think I'm Thor. The Thor movies were kind of bad. Everyone's least favorite MCU movie for a while was Thor 2. So I'm trying to make the Thor stuff, my Thor being Beta Ray Bill, fun right away. Fun, silly space stuff. Um, I'm also making everything connect. The old MCU, like Phase 1, Phase 2, did this pretty well. But in this, I'm emphasizing that everything's connected. There's a through line with the super soldier stuff. Um, and I think that's super important. And then obviously one of the biggest early letdowns of the MCU was Ultron, who was misused a bit. So I'm trying to retool him, as I hinted at, and who will be the big bad, I guess you could say, in my next wave. Wave 2, these are some of the characters I want to introduce, but I don't have a solid plan for this yet. Let me know what you guys think. Sorry for my rambling and stuff. I think it was just a fun thought experiment to like you're Kevin Feige. What do you do? Right. And I encourage you guys to do that. Go down in the comments and let me know what you guys would do in the MCU, right? We've all have our own comic book favorites who weren't used in the MCU or maybe misused in the MCU. And so I think this is just a fun thought experiment. Anyways, if you liked the video, don't forget to like and subscribe. Bye.